Today on Reset Diaries, we are diving into the topic of belonging and identity for young children and teenagers. But there's a specific angle to this discussion that I will reveal after I introduce my guest. If you are living away from your home country and raising kids, then you cannot miss this episode. So let's start by introducing my guest. I have Stellar on the show today, a children's book author based in Singapore with a mission to empower children in sustainability, safety, and wellness. With a background in law enforcement and teaching, she combines her passion for art and literature with a deep commitment to inspire and educate young minds. And then I have Jennifer with me. She has over 26 years of global experience supporting ultra-high net worth families, brings extensive expertise in social emotional development, childhood anxiety, and family communication. As a trusted consultant for expat families navigating unique parenting challenges, welcome Stellar and welcome Jennifer.
Thank you.
I have so many questions for you guys to go deep into this subject. But before we do that, as a format of Reset Diaries, I always ask my guests about their resets. So if you can go one by one and specifically talk about your reset story on this podcast.
Sure. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, you gave such a lovely introduction. Thank you. Yes, so my reset diary is that, as you said, for 26 years, I've worked as a parenting consultant and a governess and a special education needs consultant. So my reset is that it has been a very global career. I left Ireland when I was 17, and I have always been working with international families, most of them expat in various different countries around the world. My life, as a result, was quite transient as well. And also, I tended to work with one family at a time. So my reset recently has been accepting the fact that Singapore is home, but also trying to take what I know and share it more broadly now, and hopefully make it more accessible for people who maybe could not afford to have someone like me dedicated to their families. So I'm trying to set up a consultancy where I can just come in and help people at very specific points of crisis and put them on the path to positive change.
So we can't wait to hear more from you and your experience and stories.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Stella, and just touching on the great introduction you've already given. So, as you were saying, I have a background in law enforcement. So, there's been quite a few transitions for me and resets as such. First one is going from law enforcement to becoming a mother. So, I have 2 children. So, that is in itself was a big reset. And then relocating with 2 young children. My son was 2 weeks old, my daughter was 22 months. So, that was another big reset in relocating, not only becoming a mum, but also a mum of 2, and then moving to Singapore on top of that. And then thirdly, having to change careers. So I've, again, worked in the law enforcement sector. It wasn't something I could do in Singapore because I'm not a citizen or a PR at the time. So I had to really rethink about what career or what line of work would be meaningful for me. So that's when I transitioned to the education sector. I had to study all from scratch again. I had to do an undergrad again. I had to do a master's again. So that in itself was another reset. And after doing some corporate work and working in different educational establishments, I'm now set out on my own. As you were saying, writing children's books, illustrating, and bringing stuff that I really love and have passion for to the communities in Singapore. So multiple resets. I think maybe all of us, there's not one particular significant reset. They all sort of form who we are and where the direction we're working in today. So that's where I am now.
So I know, some resets, they just pass in a whiff, while some are very noticeable and force you to take action. So, Stellar, I know briefly about you. You yourself come up from different cultures. So what has been the most eye-opening experience for you, particularly, which you reflect in your book?
So one of the things I had to consider growing up is that I'm myself mixed race. So I'm from Thailand. I was born in Thailand. My mum is Thai. My dad is English. And growing up myself, there was always this sort of ambiguity of who are you and where are you from? Because the sort of classmates that I had at the time, they all either English or, they were very clear in their identity. I was one of the very few mixed race children in the 80s, giving away my age now. So, so that's something I dealt with. I didn't consider it too much of how I would have to manage that with my own children per se. But also my husband is British born Indian. So not only do my children, I had two different identities as such to relate to. My children have three. So they are now half Indian, quarter Thai, quarter white British, I guess. And one of the eye-opening things for me is, whilst growing up in Singapore, they attributed their languages that they were learning to where they're from. So for some time, they believed they were half Chinese because they were learning Chinese. They were half English because they learn English. And of course, they weren't very good at maths at the time because they were like, I'm half English, half Chinese, but I'm also half French. So I'm not quite sure where they got that from. But in the school, they had an enrichment class where they would teach French as a fun additional language once a week. And because they could speak a few words in French, they assumed that they were also part French. So that is how we had to sort of really think about how do we teach our children about our backgrounds and their identities. So I think it wasn't something I had given too much thought about as a parent initially when having children, because you fall in love, you have kids, you don't really think about who's going to adopt what culture from the husband or the wife. You just have children. And then so it's only when they started having these questions and telling people they were Chinese, French and English, we were thinking, oh, hold on a second, you're kind of not. So yeah, those were sort of what started our discussions with the children as to their identity and where they're from and what contributes to their identity.
It's interesting that your kids associated the belonging with the languages they speak, because I speak to different parents, and for some it's the language, for some it's the food, for some it's the passport that they hold. So it's quite interesting. And with this, I think I should introduce the topic. The main theme is, of course, the belonging. But in specific, we are going to discuss about third culture kids. Now, to briefly explain third culture kids, this term TCK was coined by a sociologist, Ruth Hill, in 1950s to describe children raised in culture different from their parents' home. Now, these children experience a unique blend of their parents' culture, the host country's culture, and sometimes even a third influence, creating a third culture of their own. Now, while this global upbringing offers a rich tapestry of experiences, it can also bring some unique challenges like identity, struggles, and sense of rootlessness. So, what sets them apart in this increasingly interconnected world? And how we as parents, our community, educators help these young minds build a strong sense of self and become true global citizens. So we'll explore this question with Stellar and Jennifer today, and they are working tirelessly with the community to make an impact. And I would really request Stellar to tell at this point about your latest book, and if you can read few lines from your book to give an opening to this subject.
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. So I have a new book that's coming out in hopefully January, fingers crossed, if I work hard enough. And it's on the theme of belonging, as we just discussed, inspired by my son. So I'll read a few passages from it so you get an idea. I don't have it yet. It's still work in progress.
Okay. No
the
worries.
story's written, but I have to work with the illustrations, which take time. So I'll start reading a few bits to you now. How we bring experiences with us from each trip. It slowly started to make sense in his mind. It's my family and community that make me one of a kind. Understanding now how to answer where are you from, lots of different things help make us feel we belong. Aaron ran to the map hanging in his room. He let his eyes wander and his imagination bloom. He couldn't wait to tell his friends what he had discovered. The mystery of where he was from was uncovered. So that's a little part of the book in the middle.
Right.
Thank you. So yes, it's about a little boy who in classroom they discuss where everybody's from and, where their home is. And he's a little bit confused and how their parents sort of broach that topic with him.
So for this book, you said your son actually inspired you to write this book. But I'm curious that did you tap into any other parents or any other kids while writing this book, or these experiences are largely drawn from your own family?
Most of the books that I write, they're always inspired initially by children that I know. So I like to model it on kids and their specific questions that they have. But yes, this is a topic that a lot of parents have brought up to me. So especially in Singapore, where you have such a large sort of expatriate community here. So yes, I think right now is a very big topic in the communities that I talk to.
And Jennifer, in your experience, why do you think belonging is such a big topic? Like, are parents really concerned or worried about the fact that their child has to feel belongingness to something or someone or some place? Why do you think, in your view, it's a big concern among parents?
Oh, I think it's a big concern for all of us. I think our sense of self, our identity and our sense of belonging are essential to our mental health and well-being. So I think when parents are concerned, it's because they are also, experiencing the challenges, because figuring out who we are is a lifelong challenge itself. It's part of evolution, and they want to make sure that their child isn't losing out. And so for all of us, when we move somewhere new, we have to start from scratch. We have to build a community. It can be massively taxing. Adaptation stress is a big consideration for parents, but also they're watching their children face challenges that maybe they would not have faced if they'd stayed at home. And the reality is it comes with a huge amount of opportunity, and, it's an adventure. But we always, when we make these decisions, we're aware that there are parts of it that are not within our control. So I think for parents, that's very scary. You're taking them somewhere, but you don't get to decide who the children in their class are. You don't get to decide the education necessarily that you're sending them into. You're aware that they might be facing communication struggles. If there's a lot of expats where there's a lot of transition, so they might be making friends who could disappear overnight. And you realize that what you're asking for your children is that they develop a huge amount of adaptability, except it's happening at the same time that you too are trying to develop those skills. So as parents, you like to be out in front of it, but the reality is, as a family, you're really going through it together. So I think belonging, to answer your question, is a huge topic for all of us. So that balance between belonging and fitting in is something that we might always be, be trying to find the balance.
So let's turn our focus on the key subjects for this discussion, that is the kids, because ultimately they are the ones, of course, as adults, we have a certain maturity level, we have certain networks established. It's kind of easy for us than for these young kids. To both of you, how do you think this constant need of belonging affects children's self identity? Like, especially when they see multiple cultures around them. Maybe in school, they meet completely different kids. In their neighborhood, when they play with certain kids, those could be completely different depending on where you are living. For example, in Singapore, and then at home, it could be completely different in terms of language or food. So, does it confuse kids? Does it overwhelm them? What have you seen in your research and in your experience, Jennifer?
Well, I think that every child is unique, every family is unique, and a lot of the challenges I have encountered are when fear gets out in front. It starts with adults. So if we have quite a fearful attitude, then children will take their lead from us. That's one challenge that I see.
But what kind of fear, if you can elaborate? Like,
I think generally you're making a choice when you live abroad to raise your children in on a global platform. So they're going to encounter a lot of things that you can't control, that maybe go against strong cultural values that you had at home. And I think the mistake that some people make is trying to sort of hold up and hang on to what they had at home, which actually robs children of the opportunity to experience so much more. And that's one thing I think that's important. I think if we're going to make the choice to move, we need to take it as an opportunity. So it's a growth mindset. You're choosing an expansive experiences. And really, we have to view that as a positive for them, because, it's neither good nor bad until it gets to the point of how we're helping them problem solve, how we're helping them reframe challenges. Are we encouraging them to develop resilience and adaptability? Because those are massive opportunities when you bring your child abroad. And it's something that will stand to them for the rest of their lives. If we come at it from a fearful point of view where we're worried about the influences, they're losing out, because they've actually lost that that immersion in home culture. So what you're risking is the third culture never develops, because the third culture is about the blend. So I think that's what I mean by fear. I think that our attitude is the first thing. We are the role models. We set the narrative. And if parents are open and willing to engage and build new communities, then the children will profit.
I love this. I mean, I think sometimes we are overprotective about the kids, and that kind of rubs it on the kids, and that third culture never develops. But maybe for some families it could be very intentional also, right? That they don't want that cultural influence deliberately.
I think that's something you could maybe share a little on.
Yes, well, from a sort of my parenting experience that I've had with my children, is that we try and encompass this thing where we say it's exposure without pressure. So we want to expose them to my culture that I grew up in Thailand, and my husband's culture and sort of Indian background, but without the pressure. So I think we have a model, the sort of culture iceberg. I don't know if you can pull that up for us and we can have a quick look.
Exposure without pressure. I love it.
Yeah. So if we have a look at the sort of cultural iceberg here in this diagram, when we think about and talk about culture, there's so much underneath the iceberg, as you can see, which is difficult to see. So yes, my children identify with things like the language. Lots of people, food is a difficult one. So my children aren't a huge fan of Thai food. It's very spicy. They don't find it easy to eat. And that could be difficult when I'm visiting family, because they want to cook Thai food for them, because that's the way we show love in our culture. We cook lots of food and you eat all the food. So when my children are rejecting that food, it becomes very difficult for me in the middle, because I have family who are saying, well, we spent all this time making food for your children. Why can't they eat the Thai food? So again, it's trying to bring things that they are happy to eat. For example, my children really love dosa and paratha with dal. So that makes the Indian side, that family happy, because they know they will at least eat some Indian food. I'm still working on the Thai side, but again, it's more, we try the exposure without pressure. But if we can look on here, things like biases, body language, family values, all of these things are sort of, we don't talk about them so much. So it goes much deeper than just the celebrations, just food or how we dress. Even the greetings in Thailand, we would say like Sawadee Ka, we bow and put our hands together. That's not normal in Singapore. So again, I have to explain to my children, there's an expectation my family have when we visit them, which I know is not your norm. I would love for you to do it whilst we're visiting them, because it would make them happy. But I also try to be respectful that that's not normal for them. And it's not in their best interest for me to force it. I can explain it to them. I can tell them why we do it, and then just hope that they will do it, but I wouldn't force them. We'd really try to stick to the exposure without pressure. We expose them to different things. So we can expose them to Thai temples, Hindu temples, churches, Singapore, Chinese New Year is a big celebration here. Expose them to it. And what they take away from it is up to them. And we try to develop on their natural curiosity. But that in itself is a small win, that they're asking to participate in celebrations, or they're asking questions. They may not ask all the questions we want them to ask or we think would be good for them to ask right now, but in their own time. Because I think I became more curious as I got older. The more I traveled, the more curious I became of different cultures and how people live and things. And I think depending on the age of the child, it takes time.
I think that's exactly the point. I think development is key. I think we have to appreciate that exposure itself is value. So the idea of not enforcing, but also understanding that family culture is what takes the forefront when you move from your home. So you can keep things that are remnants of your culture and certainly have that be part of your family culture. And that's the best introduction for your children that you can give them. So they have the access to that information when they're ready. And it's part of their lives without them almost knowing. And it's important when we get to the point where sometimes overeager parents can actually cause their children to reject things just because they're hearing about it too much. The pressure is too much. And so we almost do them a disservice when we try to hang on too tightly. I didn't become that Irish until I left Ireland. Irish culture is pretty strong, but it wasn't until I saw myself in comparison to other cultures that I really understood where I came from and what I had taken with me, and what parts of it, honestly, I chose as an adult to put aside when I developed my own sense of self. And the truth is, we don't get to guide our child's sense of self. That's their journey. So what we can do is make sure they have the influence, the access to information, and also the correct attitude, which is openness, right? To experience respect for other people's culture, which is, incredibly important no matter where we come from.
And I love it when Stella, you said about feeding the curiosity, basically, and don't overwhelm the kids with just too much information. And to your point, Jennifer, I love that there could be so many cultural aspects to say relation to authority, core values. The top layer has to be your own family culture, which means ultimately somewhere the buck also falls on the parents. If they are confused themselves, if they are not very clear why they are here, what do they want to give to their kids with this experience, what do they want to derive themselves out of this new experience in a new country, then they can actually derail the journey of their kids also. But Jennifer, from your experience, it was a wonderful diagram that things we could see as culture, but things which we don't see. Is there anything specific when it comes to family culture which we don't see, which as parents or family we should specifically pay attention to?
That's an interesting question, because we're all unaware of our blind spots, right? So families often come to me pretty much with that question. It's how do we ensure that we're thriving? And by thriving, that means we're not overlooking anything, right? But the truth is that this belonging and identity are very complicated. And also when you're taking family culture, there's a lot of identities in families, and we all need to navigate those together. The diagram really that I use is to give people an idea of how complicated it is, but also to give them a sort of nod in the right direction for certain things they might want to look at. So for me, I think the development of the third culture comes with various facets that we can look at, which basically there's 4. Our sense of belonging comes almost before our sense of identity, our bond with our mother, and then with the rest of our family. That's before we have any idea of who we actually are, which is the reason why on this diagram it comes before. Part of what gives us our sense of belonging is our family, our how our family culture is. One of the things that I explain to families is maybe in order to strengthen that family culture, it would be good to create your own traditions, to develop a strong sense of routine around the things you can control, because your child will be coming up against lots of things that you won't have any say in outside social situations and in schools. I think that our sense of identity also comes with learning the role that we play in our family, and also maintaining relationships with family back home. And that's all part of us building family culture. So if you have relatives at home that you really want your children to retain a connection with, it's really up to you to make those FaceTime calls or Zoom calls part of the family routine and part of your family culture. So the other thing really that you can do is to help your child with their emotional development, because they're going to be experiencing a lot of big emotions as they're going through goodbyes and transitions and adaptability. And so giving them the words for those feelings is very important. And that comes with having books around about feelings, expressing your own feelings. So it's okay when your friend leaves, you can say, you know what, I feel sad. And when your child comes to you and says they feel sad, your sort of first instinct, because we're so uncomfortable with our child feeling any kind of pain, is to say, it's fine, don't worry about it, you'll make other friends, but actually it's better sometimes to just listen and validate, and then create traditions around how you say goodbye to people. So one thing I do is with families, if there's been a lot of transitions, we might have a map of the world, and we might put pins in it for where we now have friends who have moved away. So it's sort of the idea that they're creating a bigger community rather than losing people. And that's the reality, honestly. If your child is growing up internationally, they're going to have friends all over the world by the time they're adults, which is a positive. The other thing that we can do is to support their mindset. And that goes back to what I was saying about fear. Having a growth mindset, resilience, open-mindedness, critical thinking skills, problem solving skills. We role model those for our children because we've given them the emotional language. When they come to us and tell us how they feel, we can sit down with them and we can help them to come up with solutions, to build toolboxes to face these challenges, which hopefully gives them a good framework for the future when they encounter things when we're not around to protect them from everything. And then finally, the sort of the fourth pillar is social. And that's around community and friendships, hobbies. What I always say to parents, they say, my daughter is not making any friends in school. How good are you at making friends? Do you talk to the moms outside school? Because most children, particularly say under the age of 8, they're friends with who we're friends with. So we build their community actually, and that's almost a scaffold that we put in for them. So I encourage families to take an expansive attitude towards other families and other cultures, create that community for themselves as well as for their children. And I think if you have a child in school that maybe is struggling to make friends, then encouraging things like team sport or other kind of activities where they will get to come in contact with lots of children is really good. Another challenge I have is, parents say, my son is only friends with one person and that's the only person he wants to be friends with. And that strikes terror into all our hearts when you're an expat. It's like, what if they leave, And so that again goes to attitude. And I think that's about exposure. It's to always invite other children along to work on the social side of things for your family too. So those are sort of the 4 things. And I think if you can look holistically at what you're doing and you can see maybe where one needs a little bit more input on your part, it could be a very positive thing.
I love it. So basically, just to summarize, this framework is for parents on what are the 4 key pillars that they can work on when it comes to making it easy for their kids to introduce to them to the concept of belonging and in this third culture that they are living in. So first, work on your own family traditions and routines and rituals. Work with your kids on managing their emotions, their mindset. They may not understand the word growth mindset directly, but then, as you rightly pointed out, teach them about problem solving skills or critical thinking skills. And lastly, but not the least, the most important is the social skills, like create communities. And as you said, that until the age of 8, after 8, kids are like on their own and they kind of decide who they want to be friends with.
I think it depends on the child very much. I think though you'll get a lot more pushback from an 8-year-old when they don't like someone. When they're 4, they don't care, they'll play with anyone. So you need to take the power while you have it, make hay while the sun shines.
Right.
And then, try and make sure that the social group you've set up for them is one that they're thriving in, where they're learning what friendship is and what it should look like and how to be a good friend.
So I'll ask you, Stella, what are some of your family rituals or traditions that you have created on purpose?
Well, this year I'm making a real effort to bring them to Thailand more often, to see my family members from my side. Very fortunately, on my husband's side, my in-laws, they come and visit, and my kids FaceTime them. So they FaceTime every weekend, and so they see Nanny and Grandad all the time. Because I feel that if they don't have the connection where they're actually meeting them in person, it's not relevant to them, because they don't understand why is mummy's cousin or auntie important, because they've never met them. Right. And they don't have that time to bond or get to know them. And the only person who can help them with that is, of course, the parents. If we don't bring them and we don't expose them, they're not to know.
Yeah.
Reading is a big culture we have in our household, so we do a lot of reading. We do regular trips to the library, and yes, I have books on Buddhism, I have books on Hinduism. Not that we enforce any particular religion, it's again about exposure. So we say, this is what Nanny and Grandad, they go to the Hindu temples and this is why they go. This is what they believe in. And the same when I go to Thailand, I will be taking them to Thai temples, Buddhist temples, and say, oh, this is how mummy grew up. This is where your other nanny and granddad used to take me. And this is what they believed in. So what the children choose to then believe in themselves, time will tell. But again, it's just the exposure. As they've gotten older and they can understand more and they're asking more questions, we're just doing our best to try and feed that natural curiosity. So at the moment, we're working really hard to just work on natural curiosity they have and increasing exposure time. My family members love the kids. They want to take them and show them things. So why not, And it's free babysitting for me. I can say, take them, and they will build that connection just through the time they spend there, rather than me trying to enforce something.
Jennifer, you would have seen cycles like from the kids to like teenagers. Have you seen any specific skills that sets these third culture kids apart? Like, is there something very, very distinct in them? Have you observed?
Absolutely. So I have my alumni are now, a lot of them are at university. So the first babies that I worked with. And what I think is remarkable is, first of all, their social network is vast. They make friends more easily. They are more comfortable in a crowd of strangers. They're more inclined to go to university internationally, so to base their choices on the quality of education rather than the closeness of the university to their friend set. I see them more resilient when it comes to the challenges of adapting to another culture as they're studying, and I see them more understanding of differences. So they tend to be almost more mature than their fellow students. So I'm thinking specifically now, say like 18 to 22. I think they definitely have all gone through leaving the parent culture and being like, thanks, we don't want any of that for a while. But also I feel like that will change. I think that this is part of them, and it is, it's a common part of becoming an adult, is that separation from your parents so that you can figure out who you are and what you want to engage in. But the difference, the value, is that they have seen so much. So they're making their choices from an informed point of view because they've seen time and again that you can make new friends, that the world is big, and that's the growth mindset, that, you can change, people can change, and you have the capacity to change your circumstance. And I think that's an incredible gift to give a child. So, I mean, from my perspective, I'm entirely biased here. I think it is a fantastic thing to do for a child. I didn't travel until I was 17.
Privilege, I feel.
A huge privilege,
Yeah.
huge privilege. So when I left home, I'd never even been abroad when I left home at 17 and never went back. And I was so envious. But I was a big reader, and I think, to Stella's point, reading is another way that you can give that to children. But yeah, absolutely. For my children, for the children I've worked with now who are older, their futures are just so interesting, and their personalities are so defined, because they're secure wherever they go. It's lovely to see, honestly.
Well, third culture kids, I totally second that. They have a huge upside just by the sheer amount of experiences and exposure that they have received. It's a privilege, and I think as parents or as kids who have been exposed in this environment, they should absolutely take full advantages of this privilege. But we are almost towards the end. I want to ask both of you that, as parents, as educators, or as part of that community that you all are trying to create, what you think we should be more mindful of so that we don't confuse or overwhelm kids with this idea of belonging, that we don't overdo something that we alienate them from our culture. What do you think we should do more of, and what we should do less of? Maybe Stella, you can tell us what we should do more of, and Jennifer, what we should do less of.
Well, my stuff is pretty consistent throughout. I think the more exposure you give, not just to your own home culture, but to different cultures too, is what's going to curate that sort of natural interest and intrigue that kids can have, right? Because there's just so much to learn. And we always talk about children being like natural sponges, they soak up so much information. So the more we can expose them to, be it through travel, reading, activities, the more they can sort of take good parts from it. The things that I wanted to avoid is something I still work on myself as a parent, is the pressure we put on our kids to conform to cultural norms that I grew up with, right? Because that's not necessarily applicable in this day and age for them, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I catch myself sometimes and I tell my daughter, I don't used to behave like this with my mother. And then I snap my attention that, the times are different and she's living in a different environment.
But it is hard because we grew up a certain way, and what we know of parenting is what our own experiences,
Yeah.
And and obviously we can learn from other parents in our network, from other mums that we encounter. A lot of the educators I encounter, I learn from them too. How someone may approach a particular issue. It's not, for example, just saying the swadika, like how do I approach that if my children really do not want to do that? But I know it would also offend my family members if they do not do that. How will I navigate that? I'll have to update you after my trip. But but these things like that is, again, it's a pressure that I feel. But do I need to put that on my daughter or my son? How important is that pressure overall in the big scheme of things? How offended will family be versus how distressing would it be for my kids at the same time if I really try and push this particular point. I'm just using that as an example. So I think it's a daily thing to remind myself, like, what pressures am I putting on my children that are necessary, if any? What are my own beliefs that I'm sort of trying to...
You need to separate the
Yes, yeah, because some of it is, okay, exposure, some of it is education, and some of it is just downright pressure. I'm saying you need to do this because I believe you need to do this because I was taught to do this. But is it necessarily the right way? Again, because they're living in a different environment. We don't have family around us. What good things can I take away from the way I grew up and from my culture? And what negative things can I leave aside? And try not to carry those over onto my own children. Because just because I experience things doesn't mean not necessarily the right way or the best way.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself of that.
Yeah, I love it. As parents, we really need to create two separate buckets, like what is something that we are just enforcing just because we have experience, and what is something we truly want them to do or inculcate as part of their experience and values. Love it. Jennifer, what we should do less of?
I know, the bad stuff. No, I think Stellar hits on a really good point there about stress and pressure. And I can tell you, they don't work. And I think the thing that we should avoid is being reactive. And I think we need to make sure that we have our priorities clear in our head, negotiated with our partners, so that whatever messaging we're giving our children is consistent and thought out. That's the first thing. I think that's the mistake we make because we're busy. But I think these are pretty big questions. And so it's important that we build that family culture mindfully when we're not raising them in their home culture. So that's sort of the one thing. The next thing I would say that I see families doing a lot, and it's actually a hallmark of modern parenting, is almost a fear of friction, where we have to keep them away from any challenge. And I think it's an overreaction in some ways to the parenting we might have experienced. So we're out in front, we're advocating them like they have full-time lawyers in school. We're making sure that everything is perfect and nobody's messing with our child. And unfortunately, that's not how character, self-esteem get built. And so I think we have to accept the fact that we can't control the outside world. We can only instill in them the values and the skills that they're going to need to navigate it one day without us. And I think that that's important. I think removing the sort of anxiety of what might happen from how we approach things is incredibly important. Sometimes, is this the rock I want to perish on? Is it worth fighting with them? Is that the argument we need to have? No, it's not, right? So it's just that sense of giving ourselves time in the day so that we're able to take a pause before we say the thing that we might end up regretting. From everything I've seen, children are incredibly susceptible to PR. So we have to consider ourselves a sort of a PR system at home, And that involves being pretty clear on what we believe before we open our mouths. So I think taking that time is important. So yeah, keeping the messaging consistent and avoiding being overly anxious and trying to over control what they're going to experience, instead focusing on giving them the tools to manage.
So basically, as parents, we should be in unison so that we deliver a consistent message. And the second point is that step back a little bit and don't meddle too much and try to protect your kid at every given point in time. Okay, that's great. That's nice. All right. I think we can wrap up. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, both Jennifer and Stellar. I loved this conversation and so many different aspects we covered. I think personally, for me as a parent, it was a very educating episode, and I would really try to incorporate some of the suggestions that you both have told me, like in terms of defining certain ground rules. And I think, as you said, we are so busy, we don't do that. But it's really, really essential to have certain guardrails as to what we want our kids to experience and what we don't want. I'm sure there's something to take away for everyone from this. And thank you very much for your time.